Hello, my name is Jim Gurman, and welcome to today's episode of
Kilimanjaro.
Today we're going to take a look at Milwaukee's M12 fuel circular saw. It's the model 2530. This is the -20 version, which as you can see doesn't include a battery. They have a -21 version that includes one of these larger 4.0 amp batteries. That's a significantly larger battery than come with most of the regular M12 tools. These are only about 1.3 amp hours, so these bigger batteries are about 2.5 times larger, and they'll run for 2.5 times longer. The little batteries do work without a problem with the tool though. Now getting into the tool, taking a look at it, it's a very nicely made tool. The base is made of aluminum, as is the guard on it and this guard down here. The rest of the body is made as plastic, as you'd expect. It's a brushless tool, so the runtime is significantly longer than a brush type motor, which is great since these M12 batteries don't have the most capacity. First thing I noticed with the tool is even with this larger battery, the tool is extremely light. It's very easy to use one hand, although there is a grip here to use both hands, which is probably a good idea whenever you're using a power tool. However, it's very easy to use if you need to be using it vertically, up over your head. Very nice and light to use. To fire up the saw, it's a two-step method. You have to push down on this lever here and then pull the trigger with your finger. So that's great so you don't accidentally pull the trigger. You won't accidentally set it off while you're not trying to and hurt yourself, and in your toolbox it's not going to go off automatically. On the other side you can see that there's a battery gauge here. When you pull the trigger it lights up. Taking a look down at the fence here, you'll notice that it's very nicely made. It's got this nice gauge here to see how far away from your edge you are. So if you put your straight edge down, you know that you're a set distance away. It's even got these two nice little curve cuts here, one for if you're at 0 degrees, you can see exactly the width of the blade, and at the same if you're at 45. However, that being said, this curve cut here is actually about twice the width of the blade. So you have to be very careful making that cut. If you try to line it up perfectly with that, you're going to be off by a little bit. Now to change the blade on the saw, the first thing you want to do is always take the battery out. Then up front here there's a nice blade lock, so you can hold that down and it will prevent the blade from spinning. And then you have to undo this nut here. Now the nice thing about this nut is that it's both an Allen key or a hex screw as well as a regular bolt head. So this includes on the back side here a hex key that you can use to do that. However, if you lose this, which even though it's nicely stored on here, even if you were to lose it, you can always get a bigger wrench, or if you can't get it out with this little key, you can always grab a nice big wrench to be able to do it with. So that's a great feature of the tool. On the back side here, you'll see that there is a lever to adjust the depth of cut, but this doesn't have the largest depth of cut, so most of the time you're just going to be leaving that at the full depth. There's also a little slot here for what they call a rip gauge. However, I don't see that available for sale anywhere. So it's possible you could make your own, so you could make it offset if you wanted to continually making 6-inch rip cuts or something. However, it's not the most useful thing. Milwaukee doesn't even seem to sell an accessory for it right now. The saw takes a 5 3/8-inch blade. It's not the most common blade in the world, but they do carry it at Lowe's and Home Depot, so you should never have a problem getting it. It comes with a framing blade, which is a pretty coarse blade. They also have a finer blade for using on plywood, and there's even a metalworking blade available. Enough talking, let's see how the saw cuts. I've got set up with a little piece of 3/4 inch plywood. We'll see how well it cuts that. Shouldn't be a problem. So you can tell, makes a nice cut, no problem, very easy to use. One thing you will have noticed with the saw is actually very quiet. Next up, I've got a nice hunk of inch-thick maple here. This is a nice hardwood. I'll see how well it cuts through this. So you can see it had a little bit more trouble there. It did sound like it was struggling, but it made the cut with no problem. Next up will be one of the more common tasks for this saw, and that's to cut a 2x4. Now to make this a little harder on it though, I've dug up an old 2x4 that has nice tight growth rings. So this is going to be a lot harder, a lot denser to cut through than most of the 2x4s you'll find in the store today, and should be a good test for it. So you can see that it can cut it with no problem, although it does go a little bit slower than with a corded saw or maybe an 18-20 volt saw. Alright, so here's the real question, is how long does the battery last? Now the box claims that it will cut through 170 2x4s in a shot. However, with the variation in the density of different 2x4s, different types of 2x4s, I didn't think that was the best test. Instead, I'm going to use a sheet of plywood. This is a 4-foot wide sheet, that way it fits on the camera. I've got a freshly charged 4.0 XC battery that I'll pop in here, throw my safety glasses on, and get cutting. Well, that's it. After all that, the saw was able to make it through 110 feet of 3/4 inch plywood. That's on the big 4.0 battery. So I thought that was actually pretty good. I've recently seen that Festool on their battery powered track saw, they were able to get 300 feet. So obviously it's a lot more, but that's a much bigger saw, and that saw costs probably 4 times more money than this one does. After making all those cuts, I did notice that it did seem a little bit slow. To see just how much slower, I grabbed my trusty corded circular saw with a 7 1/4 inch blade and made a cut with that. And it does seem a little bit slower, maybe 20%, 25% slower cutting with this small one, which really isn't bad for such a small, lightweight tool. The brushless technology really lets it cut quite well and quite fast. After using the saw for a couple projects, there's a couple things I really like about the saw and a couple things that I don't like so much. The first thing I do like is the little LED that shines where you're cutting. That can make it a lot easier to see your cut line, particularly when the kerf up here is not perfectly accurate. And that's one of the things I really don't like. I'm not sure why they didn't make that a narrower kerf so it would match up exactly with where the blade is. Possibly they don't trust their manufacturing process well enough to make sure that this is aligned with the blade exactly, so they want to give it a little leeway. This is also a left cut saw, so the blade is on the left side, whereas on a more typical saw it'd be on the right side. This is kind of more like a worm gear saw. That can be nice or it can be a detriment depending on your preference, depending on if you're left-handed or right-handed. I really like how the saw feels. It handles very nicely. The lightweight makes it very easy to use and easy to maneuver. However, one thing I don't like is this lever here. It's a little bit too long and it pokes out a little bit too much. I frequently will have my hand resting here when I go to make a cut, and it'll bump into my hand. That makes it feel like I'm actually hitting something on the workpiece. Not a great idea when I'm trying to make a cut. At the end of the day, the question is it worth the money? Should you buy it? I think it's a great tool. It's very well made. If you're already in the M12 tool system, it's a great investment. It's extremely convenient to have. That's always the draw of battery power. If you're up on a ladder, up on the roof, even if you're just in the shop, it's a pain to pull out the cord and plug it in. This, you can just grab it off the shelf, you're ready to go. The batteries last quite a while. However, if you're going to be using it all day, every day, it's probably not going to be enough for you. You probably want to get the bigger tool like the M18 version or DeWalt's version or Bosch's version. So the bare tool version of this costs $150. The one with this big battery costs $230. So there's quite a jump there. However, if you're lucky and you can get a good sale, Milwaukee has them from time to time where you can get the battery for free, or sometimes they'll give another tool away for free. It's an excellent deal. Of course, that being said, the M18 version of this is only an extra $50, and that may be worthwhile for you, particularly if you already have a lot of other M18 tools. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I try to post a new tool-related video every 2 weeks or so I'd love to see you subscribe. If you have any other questions or comments, if you own one of these and have something you like or don't like about it, feel free to post it in the comments and I'll try to respond. Thanks.